Hey, welcome to Alan's Music Room. This is sort of an unusual time for new content to be coming out. I'm recording this on a Tuesday night, and I'm expecting to have it out Wednesday morning. But I just finished watching the A&E biography, the two-part biography on Kiss, and I wanted to kind of do a review of that while it's still like really fresh. So let me kind of set the stage for you here. Kiss is the first band that I ever got into, that I ever really became a fan of. This is going way back to 76 or whatever. And I had been, I was a fan of pop radio and stuff like that. And I had heard Beth on the radio, and I'd heard the live version, the live release of Rock and Roll All Night from 75. So I knew who Kiss was. But I got given an album for a birthday, and that kind of sealed it. I became a huge fan. I started collecting everything that I could. I had, as many albums as were out at that time. I had posters. In fact, I had I had a big bedroom, and I had my whole bedroom lined with Kiss posters. And I remember putting a little label on the 100th one that I hung. And then again, 50 posters later, as they're starting to climb up the ceiling, I labeled the 150th one that I hung as well. It was a little bit crazy. And I also dressed up as Kiss a couple of times for Halloween. Some pictures of that. Mostly, I was a huge Ace fan growing up, but for around the time that I was doing Halloween, it was mostly Eric and Vinny, because we'll talk about that a little bit later. So I just wanted to kind of Kiss has a real special place in my life, so I wanted to do a review of this new biography. It was really, really interesting. It was quite well done. I thought the editing was great. There was a lot of really great concert footage, some that had never been seen before, which I thought was really good. And it all looked like it was sort of remastered. The picture quality on all of it was really as good as you could get. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. One of the highlights for me was seeing Gene and Paul sort of walking through the old neighborhood, and especially going into the Electric Lady Studios, and them just sort of sitting on couches, talking to each other and sort of reminiscing. They've done a lot of this kind of thing of reliving the origins of the band, and, going back to where everything started and kind of recounting all the, but this was different. You really sort of got a sense of the bond that exists between them, and in a way that I don't think we've really seen in a lot of other of these kind of documentaries. So I thought that was really, really special. I do think that there could have been a little bit more in the way of some of the talking heads that were featured in the show. Maybe it would have been nice to hear some more people talk about their influence and, experiencing them when they were, young fans or whatever. But I was really pleased that it had inclusion of particularly Eddie Kramer and Bob Ezrin, who were sort of the two key producers that Kiss had throughout their career. And hearing those gentlemen talk about their time producing key albums was really, really neat. I enjoyed that a lot. One of the neat things about this documentary was that there were, a lot of it was the same old stuff. We started out to be the band that we had never seen before. We played every small club like it was Madison Square Garden, all those stories. We heard, we've heard all that stuff before, and nothing new there. But there was a few things that I had never heard before, at least. There were a couple of really neat stories that I hadn't heard, like Neil Bogart threatening Gene. If you don't turn over the master tapes for the Alive album, I'm going to break your legs. I've never heard that before. That was kind of interesting. And the other thing was them talking about going on the Tom Snyder show, which for Kiss fans is like one of the most iconic television appearances that Kiss ever did, because mainly of Ace and Peter, because Ace was just insane. He was like, he's always kind of been known as the quiet one, the reserved one, the one that is hard to get out of his shell. And he was just off the chain in this, and just cackling and cracking jokes, and Peter's right along with him. And you can see Gene particularly kind of smoldering off on the side the more that this goes on, because they're like, the train's going off the rail kind of thing. So it was interesting to kind of hear them talk about it not being Ace's erratic behavior that was the problem with that interview, but it was Peter who was sort of like, laughing and egging Ace on, but more that they were sort of laughing at Gene and Paul. Like, he was really enjoying seeing how much Ace was getting to them. I thought that was really interesting. A couple of other things, it was really, really cool to hear Paul talk about his ear deformity. That's something that I never knew until Paul's biography came out. That was a whole new revelation for me. So this was the first time I've ever heard him actually talk about it. And I thought that was really neat. Another thing was, Gene and Paul sometimes sort of portray themselves as we have done no wrong, we can do no wrong. And the original band breaking up was all, Ace and Peter and their addictions and their crazy behaviors and all this kind of stuff. And so it was really kind of interesting to hear them talk about that in a different way, particularly Gene, who, instead of simply laying blame at Ace and Peter's feet for their addictions, talked about his own addiction, and that being to fame and to his own ego. And that was something that I hadn't ever heard him really address in quite this way before. And I thought it was really, really interesting that his own addiction to fame, to acquiring more, to having money, to being the best that there is, was as detrimental to the original lineup as Ace and Peter's behavior was. And so I thought that was really enlightening, and I was really pleased to kind of hear some of that. I do think that it was a little bit, or at least to me, it kind of came across as a little bit disingenuous, that it sort of sounded like they were kind of laying the blame on when Ace and Peter left the band and new members came in, this being Eric Carr and Vinnie Vincent, and them adopting their own personas, that it sort of seemed like Gene and Paul were sort of saying that's what made fandom sort of like lose interest in what Kiss was doing, when in fact interest had been waning for a few years before that already. And because the albums that were coming out, Dynasty did a sort of a lot of damage to the longtime Kiss fans. It brought in a whole new audience, but it wasn't something that the fans who were, there from the beginning really kind of latched onto. And then Unmasked came out, and that did far more damage, and they had already pretty much lost all their American audience by that point. Music from the Elder came out, and that was a disaster. It's an album that I absolutely love, and I think it's a brilliant album, but as far as them trying to regain their audience, it was disastrous. So I think that them focusing on new characters, Eric's Fox character and Vinny's Ankh warrior kind of thing, as being sort of a factor in Kiss's waning popularity, I think is really incorrect. And I think it goes a long way to sort of them justifying why they now have two new guys who dress up in the two original characters, the Cat and the Spaceman. So I think it's sort of a justification on their part. And I don't think, especially in the case of Eric Carr, I don't think that a new character coming into the band was as detrimental as they seem to think it is, because fandom flocked to Eric. Fans loved him. So I don't think that that was the problem as much as they think it was. And in fact, I will say that as much as I loved Eric, Vinny's makeup was so cool. And that's why I dressed up as him once, because I just thought that design was so neat. But speaking of Eric, I do feel like, okay, so the documentary was done in 2 parts. It was 2 90-minute specials. The first 90 minutes covered the origin and the 70s up until around 1980, when everything started to go kind of kablooey. And then the second half covered everything else, So I think that the 80s sort of really got, I mean, they did spend a good amount of time on it, but I do think it got a little underrepresented. And I think that Eric Carr really should have come across a little bit more than was included. They did include some really good stuff with him, some performance footage and some interview footage, and that was really, really great. But I think that by the time they get up to dealing with his death, I think that there wasn't a clear case made for how important he was to the band and how close they were with him, simply because the focus was on Gene and Paul, So, I sort of have my own connection to Eric Carr. And so that may be coloring my perception of that part of the documentary. I remember back in 80, whatever it was, 1980, my mother came home from the grocery store and she picked up People magazine. And, she doesn't know, any one person in Kiss from any other person in Kiss. She just picked it up because it had Kiss on the cover and she knew I loved Kiss. So she hands me this magazine when she comes home from grocery shopping, and there's Gene and there's Paul and there's Ace. And then there's this dude that I've never seen before, have no idea who it is. And I was just crazy. So I, read the article really fast and looked at every photo and studied the cover photo. And Eric Carr was the only rock celebrity I have ever written a fan letter to. So I knew nothing about this guy. I had not heard a note of music from him. I just knew that he had been hired to take Peter Criss's place and that they were on tour. So I wrote a letter, and 2.5 months later, I got a response. It was mailed from Frankfurt, Germany. It had an insane amount of stamps on the front of the envelope. And on the back of the envelope, he had sort of hand-drawn his makeup design as sort of like a little, seal on the envelope. But since the only photographs I had ever seen were of his original makeup, I didn't recognize what the design was, and it didn't have his name on the envelope. So I had no idea. I got handed this letter 2.5 months later, and it's from Frankfurt, Germany. And I'm like, what could this even possibly be? So I open it up, and there's this handwritten letter from Eric Carr. And from that point, I became a massive Eric Carr fan. And every album that came out, I'm a drummer, and Eric was an enormous influence on me as a person and as a drummer. And when he passed away, it was devastating. So back in 2011, I organized a tribute concert, kind of honoring the 30th anniversary of his passing. I had some local bands, and I put together a band of my own that did a bunch of Eric covers. It did a bunch of Kiss songs. It did some songs that Eric had written that other artists had recorded, like Bryan Adams had co-written the song with Eric. And so we did that song, and a Wendy O. Williams song that he had written, and stuff like that. It was such a fun night. It was just amazing. It wasn't a big success, but it was incredibly fun. I tried to recreate it 2 years later in 2013 in July for his birthday. And I tried to make it, the intent was it was going to be an annual Eric Carr birthday bash. And, it would be a recurring event. And that never flew. We did it one time and it was good. It was a great show. And that coincided with the anniversary of Lick It Up. So we did a focus on playing Lick It Up songs. And it was so much fun, but it just didn't pan out as successfully as I hoped it would. Sadly, I don't still have that handwritten letter from Eric Carr, which breaks my heart. It was lost in a house fire. Probably the most important thing I've ever owned. And, it was just sheets of paper and, burned away. But the crazy thing is that I do still have the magazine cover. The magazine basically burnt up. But the cover is like just singed around the edge and the cover photo is intact. And I keep it framed on my office wall to this day. As a, memory of the beginning of my journey with Eric Carr. So, because of that, I would like to have seen more Eric in the documentary. But I think that the amount we got was really good. I just don't think it sort of like conveyed the idea of how long he was in the band and how important he was to the band by the time that they covered his passing. Similarly, I would like to have seen more of Bruce Kulick and Eric Singer in the interview segments, particularly Bruce. I think Bruce is a phenomenal guitarist, and I think that he was such an important figure in Kiss's 80s and early 90s period. And, sort of the same thing. I don't think that we really got a sense of Bruce and Eric Singer's contributions to Kiss and how important they were before they sort of addressed them getting kicked out of the band in favor of Gene and Paul doing a reunion tour with Ace and Peter. And, that's something I hadn't actually heard them talk about before either. Having to go to Bruce and Eric, particularly Bruce, who at that point had been in the band for like 12 years, and say, we've just finished recording an album with you guys. Now hit the road because we're reforming with Peter and Ace. And they talked about how both of those guys reacted to the news and how Eric Singer was, really hurt and really disappointed by it. And that was something I hadn't heard them talk about before. And I thought that was really interesting. But I also thought that you sort of didn't get a sense of those two guys to really make a connection with what that would have been like for them. So that's sort of my take on the documentary. I really enjoyed it. Oh, and I should say that I'm wearing my favorite Kiss jersey from the 1983 tour, Creatures of the Night. The first time I ever saw Eric live. And of course saw Vinny. And that was another weird thing, is that this is pre-internet. So I did not know that Ace was no longer in the band. I just know that when I went to Lakeland Civic Center to see this show, and we went to the merch stall to buy t-shirts, here's a t-shirt with Gene, Paul, Eric Carr, and another new dude that I'd never seen before, who had a really cool makeup design, but I had no idea who it was. So, anyway, that's sort of my story, and that's sort of my take on the documentary. I thought it was really well done. I thought it's one of the most enjoyable documentaries I've ever seen on Kiss. And at 3 hours, it was more in depth than a lot of them get. So if you have A&E, I definitely recommend watching it. So anyway, leave your comments below and let me know what you thought of the documentary. I really want to, hear some of your feedback. And thanks so much for watching. Take care. I will see you this coming Sunday, where we're doing a show. I'm doing a pre-recorded show this coming Sunday because it's 4th of July and I will be, out of town and with friends doing fireworks and stuff like that. So The pre-recorded show is sort of talking about Styx's new album and doing a ranking of my favorite Styx albums. So hope you'll check back in Sunday for that. And until then, see you next time. Take care and go listen to some Kiss songs. Take care. See you.